As Premier Li Keqiang kicks off his visit to Australia, I ask a famous scholar the question of whether Australia will feel itself forced to choose between its strategic and economic interests. And I also talk to a councillor from the city of Sydney to find out about people-to-people exchanges between Australia and China. Welcome to The Point. I'm Liu Xin. The news from London that at least 4 people were killed, including a police officer, and at least 40 others wounded by an attacker who himself was also killed, is just the latest in a string of deadly terror attacks that have occurred in Europe over the past year. The attack comes exactly a year after the suicide bomb attacks on the Brussels airport and underground system, which killed 32 people. Now, the assailant this time used a weapon that has become increasingly common in recent terrorist attacks, a road vehicle. And now it is being suggested that this act of terrorism will put wind in the sails of Europe's ultra-right-wing movements. With so many elections due to be held across Europe in the coming months, the ramifications of this awful attack indeed be far-reaching. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang arrived in Australia on Wednesday for a 5-day visit. This is his first overseas visit in 2017 and also his first visit to Australia as Premier. Accompanying him is a large business delegation. Some Australians sign that Beijing is aiming to strengthen economic ties with Canberra and upgrade the free trade agreement between the two countries. In the face of an isolationist Trump administration, China is becoming a champion of free trade. Yet Australia seems to be caught between a rock and a hard place. For decades, Canberra has had to balance US strategic aims with economic interests with China, its biggest trading partner. Many are saying it is time to choose and are calling for a new approach. So what will be Australia's answer? Joining me today is Professor Hugh White of Strategic Studies at the Australian National University. Professor White, thank you for joining us. Now, during his visit to Australia, Premier Li Keqiang brought with him a business delegation. Obviously, there will be much discussion on economic ties between the two governments. First of all, in which areas do you think China and Australia can further deepen their economic ties?
Well, I think Australia is very optimistic about the broad trajectory of our economic relationship with China, and we're very hopeful that we can broaden it beyond the massive trade in raw materials like iron ore to new areas like agricultural goods, foodstuffs, services like tourism and education and so on. These are the new areas where we hope there'll be a lot of economic growth available.
Now, according to Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Zheng Ziguang, the subject of Silk Road, or the One Belt, One Road initiative, is likely to be high on the agenda during Li Keqiang's visit. However, the Australian government has just been reported to have refused to integrate its 2030 vision for developing Northern Australia with the One Belt, One Road initiative. Why do you think is the consideration behind this decision?
Well, I think the approach the Australian government takes to the One Belt, One Road initiative is kind of symptomatic of the broader issues that undergo the Australia-China relationship, because economically, of course, it makes a lot of sense for Australia to integrate its northern development infrastructure processes with China's very ambitious One Belt, One Road program. But at the political level and the strategic level, I think there's anxiety about being seen to be too closely aligned with an initiative of China's in the region, which is not just of an immense economic significance, but also obviously carries a lot of strategic and political weight as well. And I think Australia is careful not to be seen to be too closely aligned with China as it achieves a bigger leadership role in Asia. Australia is very uncertain and ambivalent about that. So whilst I think many in Australia would see the economic arguments for integrating our northern development programs with the One Belt, One Road, I think the political and strategic implications are kind of making us more hesitant, are holding us back.
Well, what could be done to reassure the Australian political circle or the security analysts about the kind of determination that China wants to rise peacefully, and China wants to develop its economic ties with other countries in the world? As President Xi said in Davos, China wants other countries to prosper while China prosper at the same time.
Yes, and I think there's a lot of goodwill in Australia towards that idea. Australians are very enthusiastic about China's rise. We've seen it to be enormously to our advantage. But we are, as a country, anxious and uncertain about what China's growing power, stronger leadership role in the region will mean. And we're also very anxious about where America's going. Obviously, like everyone else, we're confused by what's happening in Washington with the Trump administration. I suspect part of the reason why Canberra's been reluctant to endorse the One Belt, One Road initiative in connection with Australia's own development is that we worry what people in Washington will say. I think people in Washington are worried that Australia is getting too close to China, and that for Australia to align itself with the One Belt, One Road initiative would be seen in Washington that way, and that worries people in Canberra. So it's a significant example of a broader problem, and that is that Australia finds itself stuck between a very strong, growing and very important economic relationship with China and a strategic relationship with America, which has a very deep history and is very deeply embedded in our sense of our security. And we haven't, as a country, yet worked out how to balance those things.
In your opinion, what do you think would be the best approach in Australia's interests, both strategically and economically, in the long term?
Well, there's no doubt that Australia's economic future very heavily depends on a growing relationship with China, on integrating our economic future more closely with China's, and on supporting China as China seeks to build a new economic order in Asia. We're very clear that we strongly support China's push to maintain a free and open international trading environment. No one in Australia supports President Trump's ideas of a more protectionist model, so that element of the picture is very clear from Australia's point of view. On the other hand, we don't want to see the United States leave Asia completely. We accept, I think, that China will be playing a bigger leadership role, but we want the United States to stay engaged as well. And I think the best outcome from Australia's point of view will be one in which the United States and China can find a way, if you like, to share power in Asia. And that would be, of course, a very difficult thing to do, but very important in terms of regional stability. One of our concerns is that with President Trump in the White House, it seems less and less likely that that's going to be possible. He seems more likely to drag America into a confrontation with China, which nobody wants, and less likely to find a way to sustain a strong US role in Asia as America's relative power declines. And that's one of the reasons why Australian policy and Australian political leaders are kind of edgy and uncertain about what is for us a really central question for our future.
Sure, we heard about this telephone incident, for instance, the unpleasant telephone conversation between the leader of Australia. It's a telling sign that maybe the United States is not the one to lean completely on anyway in the near future, and probably in the long run for sure. Do you think Australia would have to choose between these two countries? Because China is not saying, look, come to me and say bye-bye to America. China is offering an opportunity. If you want, you can come and we cooperate. If not, well, what can we do? Do you think Australia really has to, choose between an idealistic approach and a pragmatic approach? Can we not have economic ties with both countries and maintain the kind of strategic or alliance with the United States?
Well, that's very much what Australians would like. We don't want to choose between America and China. We really want to maintain a strong and growing relationship with China, but we also want to maintain a strong relationship with the United States. Whether we can keep both of those going at once depends a lot on how the US-China relationship evolves. And particularly, I think it depends on how America responds to China's growing power and the sense that China is seeking a bigger leadership role in Asia. If America pushes back hard, if America tries to do what I think it's been doing for the last few years, which is try to encourage countries like Australia to align with the United States in trying to resist China's rising power, trying to prevent the emergence of that new model of great power relations that President Xi Jinping talks about. If that's America's approach, to try and contain China, and it seeks Australia's support, then it's going to be very hard for Australia to preserve that kind of even balance that we'd like. And so what Australia really wants is to avoid having to make that choice by seeing the US and China themselves create that new model of great power relations in which they understand and accept one another's positions in Asia and are not competing strategically. And that's why we see tensions over issues like the South China Sea as so dangerous to us, because that seems to be the point at which China's model for its future role in Asia and America's desire to remain the dominant power come directly into clash.
Where countries like Australia would have to make a choice to stand on one side or another. Since you mentioned the South China Sea,
exactly.
The Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, since he took office, it seems he has been repeating the US's rhetoric on the South China Sea issue. Also, we have heard your Foreign Minister Julie Bishop made some very unfriendly comments about China and Singapore most recently. What do you think of these comments? I mean, how can we read it? Are they meant really to criticize China, or are these comments meant to appease the United States?
Well, I think they were certainly meant to please the United States. I think people in Canberra, the government here is uncertain about how to deal with Donald Trump. You mentioned the very unpleasant phone call that our Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull had with Donald Trump soon after the inauguration. I think that's caused a lot of anxiety here. But I also think we should read our Foreign Minister, Mrs. Bishop's comments in Singapore last week, where she did, as you say, criticise China. She said China, as a country that's not a democracy, could not take a leadership role in Asia. I think that's a reflection, really, of the debate that we're having in Australia, where we're trying to work out what kind of relationship should we aim to have with China as this new and very powerful player in Asia. We have never, in Australia's history, dealt with an Asian country as powerful as China is today. We're used to living in an Asia which is dominated by Western power, that's our close allies. So we're still struggling to define what kind of role we should have, what kind of relationship we should have with a country as powerful as China. I think very few people in Australia would really agree with what Mrs. Bishop said in Singapore last week. I think that speech did not represent a sober and considered Australian view. But the fact that our Foreign Minister could make a statement like that does show that Australia is in flux at the moment. We're confused and anxious about it. We're trying to get a clear idea. My own view is that we have to recognise that China is going to play a bigger role, is going to play a leadership role in Asia, not necessarily as a dominant power or as a hegemon, but at least as a much more significant player than it's been in past decades. And that's just something Australia is going to have to learn to live with. And likewise, we're going to have to learn to live with the fact that America is going to play a smaller role. It's not going to be as powerful. It's not going to be as strongly committed. And that's a new reality for Australia, a disconcerting reality for Australia, but one Australia is going to have to learn to live with.
Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is visiting Australia for the first time since taking office in 2013. The trip is expected to boost Sino-Australian relations and push forward free trade and regional integration. I'm happy to be talking with Robert Koch, a City of Sydney councillor who is going to meet Premier Li on Saturday as the leader of overseas Chinese in Australia. Robert, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, this is really the most senior visit by a Chinese leader since President Xi Jinping's trip in 2014. It also comes as Australia is taking a leading position of the TPP for the moment, as the United States is withdrawing from that agreement. How important is improved relationship between China and Australia for Sydney? I know there are about 1 million Chinese Australian or visiting Chinese living in your city. How important is that relationship for your people and for you?
It is a very important visit in that it shows high-level government delegations. Of course, President Xi came to visit previously, and now Premier Li. So it shows the importance of our relationship, Sydney with the many cities, and of course Sydney and China's relationship, which is a very important relationship.
You, as a councillor of the City of Sydney, will not probably pay most attention to the national policies, which you will be looking closely in the exchanges, the talks, or the potential agreements that would be signed during Premier Li Keqiang's visit.
Oh, I think there are many other areas that we can pretty much look at apart from the traditional areas of trade. One of the major areas which the city is very much interested in, and also pretty much a forerunner in, is a sustainable development. And sustainable development in our city, which we have built up a very strong stance on. Tackling climate change, we have a plan that takes us to 2030, which is called Sustainable Sydney 2030, which looks at our the reduction in carbon emissions, and also the reduction in the dependence on fossil fuels, so that we can have a cleaner, greener city to live in. Our city has over 1 million people in it each day, and it's very important to have a good environment, a very healthy environment for people working and living in the city. So this is the one area I think we can collaborate most in with many of the Chinese cities.
Why do you think the Chinese cities?
The other.
Yeah, let me talk a bit more on this. You are saying that the city of Sydney is looking for even more environmentally friendly lifestyle and environment. What do you think Sydney can learn from its Chinese counterpart in this regard? I'm sure a lot of Chinese cities would look for Sydney for lessons and experiences.
Oh yes, we in the city of Sydney is pretty much in the forefront in terms of leading in Australia in what we do for our city, in terms of the environmental sustainable policies that we have, and we try to encourage in our city. And we have been building cycleways, and we're encouraging people to ride the bicycle, become healthy, not depend so much on the motor vehicle. And congestion, traffic congestion in the city. So this is very important for for a healthy lifestyle, and also using renewables. We in the city have also very supportive of using renewables, such as solar and trigeneration. And what we can learn from other, from cities in China as well, is that how they adopt using renewables. And I know that and many cities in China have adopted environmental sustainable policies very readily, and they're pretty much using a lot of like pretty much environmental sustainable products, such as solar power, wind power. That we know of. So these are things we can learn in terms of implementing the policies, and implementing policies that are less fossil fuel dependent.
Now, you have been having very frequent exchanges with Chinese cities, for instance, with big cities such as Beijing, Shanghai, or medium-sized cities such as Wuhan. What do you see are the potential in enhancing such city-to-city exchanges in the future between Sydney and other Chinese cities?
I think the exchanges with these cities are very important, and our relationship with them are very important, as we are the major capital city in Australia, and then having relationships with such large cities and capital cities in China is important in the sense that it fosters the exchange of trade and the education industry, which is a very large industry as well, which is also a future industry, and especially now with the digital economy coming online, I think it's very important that we foster close relationships. And this relationship started very much so in exchange of culture, which I have been trying to advocate for these many years, and the exchange of culture in the sense that we have the largest Chinese New Year festival outside of China, and this came started as a small community event, and this exchange of culture lets Australians of all nationalities, of all cultures, understand Chinese culture better, and it has grown now to such a large scale that we have our Chinese New Year festival as how Sydney celebrates Chinese New Year. We have lanterns designed by leading artists, leading Chinese Australian artists, very well-known artists, and placed in very iconic places like the Opera House.
Yeah.
From last year and this year, we have a big Zodiac lantern place at the Opera House and at Customs House, at Martin Place, all the key places. So, there's a lot of interest from the locals and tourists. We have a lot of tourists coming in the city, and they have a lot of interest in Chinese culture. They like to see, how do Chinese people celebrate Chinese New Year, the most important cultural day in Chinese culture.
Sure.
And
I was going to mention that because...
And we're successful.
Yeah, I was going to mention that because you have been promoting this cross-cultural awareness. We as Chinese, of course, very proud, very happy that the Chinese traditional holiday is celebrated in such a grand scale. People, for the local, for the Australian people who have nothing to do with the Chinese origin, and for the economy of Australia as a whole, or of the Sydney area, what benefits do you think such has created?
Well, the Chinese New Year Festival has created, it started as a community event. The Chinese community in Sydney is a large Chinese community in Sydney, in that it's nearly 10% of the population, and Chinese is the second most widely spoken language apart from English. So it being a community event and growing as such, in that many people in Sydney-siders would like to learn more about Chinese culture, and we had visiting delegations visiting provinces and cities, bringing the beauty and the culture of each different province from China, and showing the crafts and the performances and the cultural dances. People like to learn about that. People like to understand that, and once they see that the different provinces coming, they would like to visit China and visit these provinces and see for themselves. This brings greater understanding between the two cultures, and for Sydney-siders, for our local businesses, is great because we get a lot of tourists at this time from China, since it's such a big holiday. As I understand it's about a week to 10-day holiday in China, and so a lot of people come here to celebrate Chinese New Year, and they can partake in all these festivities that's going on. For this year in our Chinese New Year Festival, we had over 80 events throughout 3 weeks of the celebrations in the whole city, ranging from performances to workshops in teaching people how to make lanterns, to food stalls and Chinese New Year banquets. So it covers a wide range, and also as I say, food is a great complement to all the cultures, and many of people like to, and the Sydney-siders especially, like to taste the kind of food that is being offered during Chinese New Year.
Yeah. Let me ask you this personal question. I mean, right now you're the only councillor of Chinese descent, right? In 5 million people, 14% are Chinese.
Yes.
So the representation in the local politics of the Chinese community or of the Asian community is still very small. What is the trend in the future? Are we seeing more people of Asian descendants participating in the local politics and have greater say in the local affairs?
Well, I shall hope so. I mean, we have very high-level visits from President Xi to Premier Li, and also the Foreign Minister Wang has been here as well. And I think this is, I shall hope that this will encourage Chinese Australians to have more say in and more political influence in the political world, because we have a large community here, and we need a voice for to represent the Chinese community and also the Asian community. I'm very close to a lot of the students, the overseas students here, and especially the Chinese students. And each year I go to the major universities to give them a welcome talk, and I try to encourage them, and I give them a lot of opportunities to come and participate in our municipal government, and to see how the government works, and what is our system like, so that to gauge the interest and to stir some interest in them, so that when they graduate and when they finish, they might want to do something in this area as well. Because I think the students from China are the ambassadors for both countries. The ambassadors for China, when they come here and they learn and they assimilate in the culture, they have made many friends, they know how our system here works, and then when they're back in China, they are like ambassadors for Australia as well. So I think it's very important to foster interest and foster opportunities for this new generation.
And here is my last point. Countries shouldn't necessarily be forced to choose one at the expense of another. China doesn't have a problem in dealing with countries that are allies of the United States. China does not have a problem with these countries continuing their strategic alliance with whoever country they choose to, so long as it is not targeting China's legitimate interests. And China is not looking to replace the US in this regard. It only wants to foster a good relationship with countries who see the value in that. And that's all from this edition of The Point. Watch our program by downloading the CGTN Live application, or follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. And you can watch our previous shows by going to the CGTN channel on YouTube. Click on the playlist and look for The Point with Liu Xin. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on CGTN.